Sounds better at the Leaf game, guys, just so you know. Okay, we're going to start this meeting by rising and reporting on a couple of issues that happened in our closed meeting earlier this evening. I'm going to read you a couple of resolutions that we're going to pass in open session here. Resolution 1, this is regarding the Pull and Well, and this is an agreement between the town of Orangeville, the town of Amaranth, and the developer, Haymont Investments and Laurel Park Investments. The resolution reads, whereas Laurel Park Investments, Inc. and Haymont Investments Limited, collectively referred to as Haymont, transferred lands to the corporation of the town of Orangeville, and whereas the corporation of the township of Amaranth, the township, commenced legal proceedings against Haymont and the town in respect of the transferred lands, and whereas the proposal of the transfer was to convey the Pull and Well to the town, and whereas the parties have now resolved their differences regarding ownership of the land on which the Pull and Well is located, now therefore be it resolved, 1, that the council approve payment of $500,000 to the township of Amaranth in accordance with the town settlement proposal dated January 15th, 2019, made to Haymont and the township as approved by council and accepted by those parties. Number 2, that the $500,000 be held in escrow and ultimately paid to the township or returned to the town in accordance with the terms set out in the town settlement proposal dated January 15th, 2019. And number 3, that the $500,000 be paid from development charges. May I have a motion to approve that resolution? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? Thank you. The second item this is with respect to an issue that is happening on Still Court, and it was a drainage issue that has been handled in previous years by previous councils. This resolution states that council immediately withdraw a previous council's offer to repair drainage pipes on private property between homes on Meadow Drive and Still Court. May I have a motion to accept that resolution? Councillor Post, seconder. Councillor Taylor. Any further discussion on that? No? All in favor? That's passed unanimously. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to move back to our agenda. I'd like a resolution to adopt the minutes of the previous council meeting. Councillor Peters, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All in favor? Thank you. On to item 7, presentations, petitions, and or delegation. 7.1, a presentation by Lura Consulting, an update on our Sustainable Neighborhood Action Plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Susan Hall, and I'm a VP and partner at Lura, and I've been working with the town on its first sustainability plan, so we wanted to give you an update on where we're at with that process and when you'll get to see us again. So just to give a quick overview, a Sustainable Neighborhood Action Plan is something that the town had applied to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities for funding to support. It is intended to be a collective plan, community-wide, so it is not only intended to be strategies and actions that the town itself can take, but that are designed for the community as a whole. And the idea is to create a shared vision for the future that looks at the environment, quality of life, economic well-being, a well-rounded, comprehensive plan. We started working on the project in the summer with a planning phase. We spent some time reviewing and collecting data on what the plans are that the town and county currently have. We are working with a steering committee of town staff who've been helping us take a look at those, complete a SWOT analysis. We've moved into visioning and goals, where we went out to the public. We held a series of events to gather public input on vision and goals. We talked to staff and we talked to stakeholders. And now we're between phase 3 and 4. So we've got a draft vision, draft goals, draft strategies, and we're working on actions. We'll be moving into defining an implementation strategy that will look at responsibilities and broad timelines, drafting the plan, and then the final phase would be approval, looking to come back to council in June. So we held our first round of engagement, and we just wanted to share sort of high-level engagement numbers. We held what we called pop-up community conversations. So these are booths at existing events. We went out to the farmers market, tree planting, the Georgian College campus, harvest celebration, those types of events, and we're able to reach over 200 people, get input from almost 150 of those. We had a community survey online that asked the same types of questions. We had a town staff survey that also asked similar questions about vision and goals, but also asked about promising practices from other municipalities. And then we held stakeholder focus groups in November and engaged 32 different organizations, 50 people from 32 organizations. So just over 440 folks participated in that first round. We actually had our second stakeholder workshop last week and had about 40 individuals come out and participate in that as well. So that was a really great opportunity to get some feedback before going over these the vision and goals with you. So things that we heard, people felt it was important, things around vitality of the downtown, keeping the community engaged. This is about quality of life. This is about the next generation in Orangeville. The plan should be flexible so that you can adapt if there are opportunities that come up, and the town should be leading by example. So what we've got is a typical sort of strategic plan framework with vision, goals, strategies, and actions. And the draft vision that we presented to stakeholders last week is Orangeville is a livable, green, healthy, and thriving community. We talked about green, including the natural environment, water, resources, those kinds of things. Livable had a variety of meanings in terms of connected, affordable, accessible, walkable, inclusive. Healthy from the lens of mental health, activity, education, local food. Thriving from an economic lens, and then community would encompass businesses and residents. And what we heard from folks last week was that it resonates, but the term livable was not the preferred term. So there was a couple of suggestions for alternates there. And then we have a series of goals and strategies. Based on the feedback last week, the goals are on track, and so are the strategies. So I'll just go over them in a high level, and then I'm happy to answer any questions you have. So for transportation, we talk about reducing the dependence dependence on motor vehicles, and we have strategies around shifting to more sustainable transportation, access to transit, and then promoting walking and biking in a connected and safe community. Environment and natural resources. In the fall, this was just listed as water, but stakeholders in the community and the steering committee said we need to round this out to be natural resources and the environment more holistically. So we talk about protecting and enhancing the natural environment. Stakeholders had said, well, maybe there's some more that we need to do under this one. We've got water, access to safe drinking water, capacity for wastewater treatment, natural heritage, and urban forest. And the two that were identified last week were around waste reduction, and we need to have some kind of objective around parks and green space. Social covers a lot of different elements. So we talk about an engaged and inclusive community. This covers affordable housing, access to social and community programs, access to healthy food, and then social networks that encourage well-being and celebrate the community. Land use planning aligns with the provincial policy direction for planning. It's land use that creates healthy, livable, and safe communities. So this would be mixed-use development, coordinated approach to land use and infrastructure, and then connection, again, was a key message from the community, was that it should be connected in terms of transportation and land use. Energy is around clean and reliable energy sources, looking at renewable energy, resiliency of the infrastructure, and a culture of energy conservation. So we had good feedback from both Enbridge and Hydro on these. Economic development and culture, so preservation of Orangeville's small town appeal, but bolstering a robust economy. So that would be through the preservation of things that you have that are working well, expansion of tourism, culture, heritage, attraction, retention, and expansion for business, and then looking at connection of tourists to the town as a hub while they're in the county and region. And the last one is corporate and fiscal. So this would be the one that relates directly to town operations. And it focuses on municipal leadership and has 3 strategies. So one is around interdepartmental collaboration. The other is around collaboration with others and other municipalities. Many of the folks last week said, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If there's something good happening in a neighboring community, let's partner and work together. And then the last would be integrating the sustainability principles into town policies and practices. So we had our stakeholder workshop last week to get feedback, as I said, on these and actions. We are in the midst of doing community conversations now. So we have Family Day. We'll be out at Family Day and gathering some thoughts on the vision and goals as they stand from the community. We'll move into drafting the plan, have a 3rd community round of conversation in April. That would be a chance to review the draft plan, make any refinements, and we plan to bring it back to you in June. And that's it, so thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Hall. First of all, I want to thank you. And some of our members of council were at your meeting that you hosted at Tony Rose last week. It was a very productive meeting, I thought. Lots of good input from residents. So I want to thank you and the team at Lura for helping to facilitate this and meeting with town staff and community members. And for anybody out in the audience or watching at home, I would encourage participation in the further public meeting that will happen in April. I thought a lot of good thoughts were exchanged, and looking forward to that next meeting to add to what has been already determined. So thank you. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation as well. I was also in attendance at this stakeholder workshop, and I'll concur. The feedback was very passionate, very insightful. I'm very much looking forward to this document setting the basis for some of the decision-making surrounding sustainability in the future of this town. And I'd also like to reemphasize a point that was made in that this plan is really meant to address or be addressed by both citizens of Orangeville and town staff. So I very much looking forward to, the Sustainability Committee taking on a portion of this, perhaps other volunteer agencies, citizens, as well as town staff. It's a comprehensive plan, and looking for a comprehensive effort from the town.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, through your worship, to Ms. Hall. Thank you very much. We've had the pleasure of not only being a part of a previous session external of this organization, but I also want to congratulate your efforts so far, and I also concur with the mayor and also Councillor Peters. I do encourage those that are in the audience, be that here in the council chambers, but also those that are watching, and also those in the community, take advantage of the opportunity on Family Day, because having the input from the community is going to be vital in moving this forward. And I also, again, just want to compliment your firm does some very good work. Okay.
Okay. Any other further questions for Ms. Hall here, the councilors? Thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, moving on. Item 7.2, presentation from Deborah Sipkema regarding Dufferin County Cultural Resource Circle and National Indigenous Peoples Day. Ms. Sipkema, please.
Good evening, Council, Mayor, staff. I'm honored to be able to sit in front of you and present the next Indigenous Peoples Day here in Orangeville. The slide presentation I put together has kind of shown you what we've been able to pull together over the last 4 years, and I'm going to give you a little taste of what's yet to come for this year. So, to start off, this is our 5th anniversary coming into December this year, but we are celebrating early. We have got the medicine garden we're going to be opening up on, hopefully, I think it's June 8th we're looking at, and then followed by National Indigenous Peoples Day. So here, I'm just going to kind of go through this slide a little bit, and then I'll go on to what we're going to do next. So this is how we started. We started in 2014. We had our very first community feast and our first Aboriginal Day. And of course, all in that same year, we incorporated on the 10th of December. Really an exciting year for a first year. So this is a little bit about the dinner. If you notice, the kids that are there were from Orangeville District Secondary School's High Skills Major course in the culinary arts. They were the creators of a 5-course meal that day, and they got a standing ovation for that hard work that they put out. And Mr. Andrews, of course, Councillor Andrews, of course, was at our inauguration, and as was Councillor Bradley at the time. And of course, you can see that's a gathering of a few of our Indigenous communities from around where we are here. So here's some conferences and workshops, and of course our needs assessment that we've accomplished over the last 4 years, just a little bit of work. So this is where we were doing had a drum making workshop. We've partnered up with FTP to help them put out their land acknowledgement that sits outside of there. We worked with the town at their tree planting ceremonies, and also in this is the groundbreaking for the medicine wheel garden. And this is what's currently happened. We've had a flag flying in Amaranth Township for quite a while. And now we've got the one flying here in Orangeville, which we're so excited about. And of course, this is a little picture, kind of what the garden looks like before the really bad snow hit it. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, it doesn't. It looks incredible when when the snow isn't on it and you're standing in front of it. You get the real scope of what was done. And of course, Mayor was out there helping, as was a few other people who came and helped, Deputy Mayor and Councillor Andrews, and a few others from within the community who had time to come and help. And here is at the flag raising ceremony. So all of council was present for this. The drum group that we have presented here will be coming back for Aboriginal Day, or Indigenous Peoples Day, sorry, to help us celebrate. And here's just pictures from the garden, different people who have all kind of participated at some point. And of course, none of this was possible without the support and help from Whispering Pine Landscaping. I'm sorry if it kind of is branding, but I have to tell you that that organization was absolutely a great help when we needed the support to be able to understand how to lay this and create the whole process. So these are some of the nominations we've had and the awards, the one award we've gotten, which we were so excited to have. It's been a long process. This is what we've got coming up in the next year. Hopefully, I'm working hard. I'm working on I just finished writing a grant to bring the I'm a Kind Man program, which is an awesome program that helps with ending violence against women and brings men together in a supportive role. And of course, we're always looking to continue our partnerships with the town of Orangeville. So now you're wondering, what's going to happen this year? I don't blame you. It's going to be packed. Right now, what I can confirm is DM LaFortune, known as Mama D, who was there at our first year, will be returning this year. And you don't want to miss her music. She's absolutely fantastic. It's a kind of a folksy process, and her lyrics are something that are thought-provoking. Of course, Larry Kurtz and the Lawbreakers have been supporting us since 2014, and they will be returning this year. Jimmy Dick and his drum group, the Eagle Heart Singers, who were both at the flag raising ceremony and the Christmas celebration we had this year, will be coming and helping us celebrate this as well. We're working on a lacrosse exhibition to be done this year, along with the indigenous history of lacrosse and how it came to be where we are today. And Chief Najawan from Nawash Nation will be coming down, and he will join us here in Orangeville, and it'll be a fabulous day. It's going to be running on June 21st and June 22nd. June 21st will run between 1 p.m. and 10 p.m. And June 22nd will run between 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. at Alexandra Park, both days. We're hoping to do a sunrise ceremony at 6 a.m. at the Medicine Garden, which will be the first ceremony right after its inauguration.
Debbie, we got a really full schedule tonight. I'm sorry,
Nope,
but
that's okay, I'm done.
we're going to have to wrap this up. But thank
I'm
you so
done.
much for your presentation tonight, and I know we're all supportive of Indigenous people here on our council, and we're proud of what you've accomplished in the 5 years that you've been doing this work, and we're going to continue to support what you're doing, and we're looking forward to Indigenous Peoples Day. Any further comments from councillors? Councillor Andrews.
Very quickly, and again, thank you very much for your presentation. I also want to congratulate both you and Gil for all the work that you've done. I'd just like to, and I know that I ended up mentioning this in the previous presentation, but for those that are in the gallery or those that may be watching, these two have been the catalyst of this organization since 2014. They do so with their heart on their sleeve. They do so in so many different ways, and I think that if there are members of the community that can also reach out to participate and help out in some way, I'm just making the call. You put in so many hours to make this happen, but there's only two of you. You do have a robust committee as well, but you can also end up having other people that would be possibly willing to help out in some small way.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Debbie, for your presentation. Okay, moving along, 7.3, Mr. Ron Lehman. You wanted to make a presentation to us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Welcome aboard, by the way. It's good to see some new things and some new buildings. It's going to be a fun time. Before I get into my little presentation thing, I wanted to say a couple of things. Thank yous for, I don't know who was responsible for saying that Bill 66 has got to go this way and not this way. Whoever did that, thank you. The other thing I want to thank you for, and I don't know who's responsible, but when we had that storm, our streets were plowed but not salted. Hooray, the drinking water wins again. And also, it slows down the cars, and I've been waiting to get cars slowed down in this town, and that is, if I could keep snow on the roads all year, I would say great, because they're not speeding. That's enough said, but thank you very much for all the good things. Some very encouraging things I heard from the first person that spoke, the first lady who spoke. So maybe we're going to win some things here. I guess you folks have read over my comments that I made about before I get into it, I don't know how much I have to do on that, but I don't want to read it again. Do I have to read it again?
No, we've all read it.
Okay,
Yeah, it's
what
about vehicle idling, correct? That's your issue?
I just want to give you a bit of background. I mean, I'm a cancer survivor. I beat MCC, which is Merkel cell carcinoma, one of the worst cancers you can get 3.5 years ago. I mean, it's devastated me and my family, but I survived it. I'm a tough bugger. I don't give up and I don't quit. So I beat that. However, when I read this, and I know a little bit about this bylaws, I've got a neighbor who parks 8 feet from a basement window. You can't stop wind or air coming into your house. I don't care how much you seal it. And this guy, he starts his vehicle up remotely. If it runs out to 15 minutes, he starts it again. Sometimes it goes for an hour. That is getting into my home. And how many more are doing that in Orangeville? God only knows. There's nothing in this bylaw that covers remote starters. And it's about time. I don't know how you do it. I don't know if I should rewrite the bylaw. That's not my responsibility. But somebody's got to get a hold of this and change it. Because as far as I'm concerned, we're all in the same pot here, you know. We all breathe the same air. So if we can keep this damn stuff down, so much for it. And I'm for that.
Right.
You know, I'm for us and good health and everything like that. So if you folks can see me sitting here as an 87-year-old, I've beat cancer, I've beat a few other things, I don't quit. So keep up the good work. That's all I can say to you folks, and I'm glad to see we got some new faces here. I'm
Well,
really
thank you.
happy for that. And I
Thank
think we've
you,
got some
and,
success coming. I
and-
don't know if I should say anything else, but
Well, first of all, God bless you in your fight for your cancer fight, and I'm glad you're here with us today. So thank you. Earlier this, I guess it was last week, Councillor Sherwood made a comment to staff and to councillors about the fact that we have a unique opportunity to disseminate information through our hydro bills, for instance, those that get mailed, and there's going to be some information about our taxation coming out, but we also have opportunities for other information, and perhaps informing people about idling and just reminding them about that might be something that we could include in a mail out to Orangeville Hydro customers. So anyway, there's opportunities there, and we'll try and give some more education on that front to our residents.
I know the town puts out these things about our drinking water.
Right.
You know, like this is something, I worked on the Melanson mega quarry thing. I was very busy on that for quite a while. I wrote articles. I was writing articles about the quarry, the mega quarry, before it even became popular.
Right.
And I was very involved in that. When we won that, I was really happy. And we can win these battles, and we're going to have to win these battles. If your grandchildren, if some of you have grandchildren already or are going to have them, they have a right to have a home to live in, you know?
Well, you know, we saw a presentation there from Ms. Hall from Lura Consulting about our sustainable neighborhood action plan, and this is something that we might be able to incorporate into that. You know, the word sustainability is don't leave a pile of trash for your kids, right? Don't make sure you leave things in a better shape than you took them on, and that's what we're going to try and do here. So.
If there is something written into the bylaw, if it's changed, there's something written in there about these remote starters, how will I find that out? Because my next door neighbor, we don't get along. I gotta tell you that right now. I don't hate the guy or anything. I don't hate anybody. But
Well,
he's doing this because he doesn't like me.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. But I think remote starters are something that many people have. I think we need to educate people that you need to keep it to a minimum if you're going to use them, right? I mean, I don't know how you can legislate away that type of a product that people buy
Just
as
tell them
part.
stop. Period. It's that simple.
Yeah.
If I say to you, you walk across that street and there's 14 cars coming, am I going to say to you, don't walk across that street? Of course I'm going to tell you not to walk across the street. You're going to get run down. It's the same thing. This guy is killing my family.
Right.
How many other families in the neighborhood is he killing? And how many other people are doing the same thing?
Yeah, I would hope, Mr. Lehman, if you do have that issue where it's extensive like that, that you do call, into our bylaw.
Well, you know what I'm
and
going
we'll-
to do? I saw a police officer here tonight.
Yeah.
I know Chief Kalinsky. He and I get along fairly well. And I've talked to him on occasion about other things.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk to him about this.
Yeah.
Because I'm not against phoning them up and saying, I did want to ask that question. if the bylaw is changed or not changed, who do we talk to about getting it enforced? The police department? Because I'll tell you right now, the bylaw can't do it.
Yeah.
They're just not set up to do things like
It's a
that.
bit of a conundrum. It's a difficult thing to enforce, Mr. Lehman, but we'll do our best to try and do that. But I think education is something that we've got to work on and make sure people understand that idling cars are not a good thing. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Lehman, for that presentation. Through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Jones. Are you the one I should talk to about this? When was the current bylaw done? Do you know?
Through you, Your Worship, to Deputy Mayor McIntosh, I'd like to defer that to the clerk.
2007.
Thank you. Seeing the letter from Mr. Lehman, is some of these that could be implemented in a new bylaw, a more up-to-date bylaw? Is that something we could look into?
We can look at anything. The difficulty is with enforcement. If someone's idling, and I think Mr. Lehman has run into this, if you call the police or bylaw, quite often by the time they arrive on scene, the car's gone.
Thank you.
I know there are idling bylaws, so, yeah,
Any signs around town? There's only
Right.
one that I know, just outside this building.
yeah. So all I can say, Mr. Lehman, is we're going to do our best to look into this. We're going to do our best to educate, and I think, but to prohibit remote starters is, I think that's a difficult one for us to tackle, with all due respect. But I think education is where we have to go with this. And
You look at the temperature inside there. To try and interpret that, people are going to look at it and say, well, below 31, it's over 35, you know, I got to keep my air conditioning going or my heater going. So they just rely on that, and that's how they get around it.
Right.
So they really, what is written in there, it's self-defeating.
Right.
It's self-defeating the way it's written.
Right.
So it's got to be changed as far as, from what I can read. I'm kind of finished University of Life, you know, and I've learned a few things as I've gone through
Of course
life.
you have, yeah.
But when I read things like that, I think, it says one thing, and on the other hand, it tells you something else. And when you have conflicting things in something as important as a bylaw,
Right.
then there's something's got to change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
and thank you.
Appreciate all your kind words as well. All the best. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess I just wanted to thank Mr. Lehman for his presentation as well, and my sympathies go out. I do agree with you, Your Worship, on the educational component, and I guess I just wanted to make a statement to the people that are watching tonight and that are in the gallery. The reality is, if you have a new car, most new cars come with these car starters, so typically you have a newer vehicle if you have a car starter. The reality is, you do not need to run a new car for very long, so it's just not worth it to do it. It's costing you money, and it is hurting the environment, and I guess we all need to band together, back to the point that you're making, Your Worship, and that is the educational component. You're just wasting the environment and your time when you're doing this, and you know, to Deputy Mayor, I'd be happy to look into this a little bit with you and see what we can figure out moving forward.
Very good. Great, thank you. Okay, moving along on our agenda. Item 8, we have no statutory public meeting. We have no consent motion. Staff reports. 10.1, we have OPP costing proposal initial meeting and a recommendation that the report, the OPP costing proposal initial meeting, be received. May I have a motion? Councillor Post, second by Councillor Taylor. All in favor? Thank you. 10.2, part lot control exemption application. A recommendation that this application be received and that the part lot control exemption application and bylaw included as attachment 3 be approved. May I have a motion to... Okay, Deputy Mayor McIntosh, second by Councillor Taylor. All in favor? 10.3, Orangeville Highlands Phase 2 Draft Plan. We have a delegation from Karen Bennett, Senior Associate from GSAI. No? I'm sorry, excuse me.
No, through you, Mayor. Ms. Bennett has withdrawn her delegation, but she is present to answer questions if council has any.
Okay. Councilors, do we have any questions for Ms. Bennett? Seeing none, we'll move on to 10.4, encroachment agreement. Oh, there is a motion. Okay. I didn't get an update here. What is the motion? Ah, okay. Okay, I think what I'll do is just read this off here. The recommendation that report number ISPL 2019-08, Orangeville Highlands Phase 2 Draft Plan of Subdivision, Official Plan Amendment, Zoning Bylaw Amendment, application file numbers S110, OPZ 510, Direction for Local Planning Appeal Tribunal pre-hearing conference be received, and that the staff and the town's legal counsel be directed to attend the local appeal tribunal pre-hearing conference scheduled for February 26, 2019, and represent the following position with respect to the appeals of the application: that the town is unable to support the application in their present form, and a decision on the applications is premature at this time; that the town continue to negotiate as part of the ongoing review, which is currently underway, with the applicant to address unresolved issues with the applications. 3, the town wishes to facilitate further discussions and consultation among all parties to this appeal in an effort to resolve the outstanding questions and concerns regarding the development proposal. And 4, the town wishes for further public consultation to occur before council makes its decision regarding the applications under appeal. And the staff and the town's legal counsel be authorized to take such necessary steps as required to implement the foregoing, and the staff be directed to facilitate further discussion among the parties and participants to the appeal in an effort to resolve issues and concerns with the applications, and that staff be directed to report back to council on the progress of the discussions among parties and participants, as well as the overall review process as necessary and prior to any subsequent hearing or pre-hearing event to be scheduled by the tribunal. Any comments? Councillor Sherwood? Okay. Motion to accept that? Second by Councillor Post. Any comments from council? All in favor? Okay, thank you. All right, 10.4, we have an encroachment agreement, 66 Broadway. Recommendation that the encroachment agreement for 66 Broadway be received, and the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute the encroachment agreement attached to this report. May I have a motion to accept this recommendation? Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Andrews. Comments? Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is more of just a general thought. It's not necessarily specific to the motion, but I was looking at this property, and in light of the accessibility goals of the town, I was looking at sort of those 4 or 5 properties just as you get down toward Wellington, and I wondered if the redevelopment of this, the addition of this doorway on this building, perhaps in collaboration with neighbors, could look at the accessibility of those buildings. Right now, there are 3 or 4 steps leading up to each of those buildings, so perhaps this is something for the future chair of the accessibility committee, but since it was brought before us, and perhaps that could be a consideration back to the landowner in this case.
Right. One of the other things I hope that this council is going to tackle in the near future is the idea of downtown revitalization. There are some issues with the sidewalks we know on Broadway, and perhaps we can incorporate in partnership with the building owners more accessibility for all of the storefronts on Broadway. So I certainly concur with what you've said. Any further comments? Okay, all in favor? That one's passed unanimously. Okay, now we're on to 10.5, provincial transit gas tax funding agreement. May I have a motion to accept this report? Councillor Sherwood, seconded by Councillor Peters. Any further comment from councillors? All in favor? 10.6, fire route bylaw. Recommendation that a report be received for a new fire route bylaw. May I have a motion? Councillor Taylor, seconded. Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Any further comment? All in favor? 10.7, transit transfer point. Recommendation that a report be received and that the clerk be directed to request. Okay. The clerk be directed to request that the county clerk bring the transit transfer terminal matter back to county council for consideration. Prior to us voting on this, we're going to have some delegations. Mr. Whitcomb.
Thank you for this belated opportunity. I am Mark Whitcomb, 34 Blind Line. Have lived in town for 36 years, have served on OSAT for the last several years. I was the person who wrote the grant, got the money, and then planted nut trees and nut shrubs, and also additional fruit trees at the garden, and I've been involved with the community garden itself and with somewhat with the food bank garden. And I am distressed that this proposal has come back and is continuing. We have objected before to this council and before in August to the community council, I think it's called at county, and thought that that had at least turned this proposal back to be further looked at, but it's being presented in exactly the same way. And that is that it puts idling buses and decelerating and especially accelerating buses right beside the community garden. And the current plan as is would have about the buses idling about 2 sidewalk widths away from the actual fence of the garden, and would require that at least half of the trees, if not more than half of the trees on the roadside be moved. The problem with the diesel exhaust, the exhaust from the buses right on community gardens, is that that releases a number of pretty noxious contaminants, pollutants, and the worst of it is the particulate matter that comes out of poorly run, in other words, accelerating and decelerating, if there's an engine compression during deceleration, directly onto the vegetables and the fruits. And so, to me, that's an issue for the food bank. That's an issue for the people who have their community plots there. That's an issue for any of the members of town who are welcome, and it's been publicized this way, to go along and pick the fruit as it comes ripe. That's the point of those fruit trees and the nut trees. And so I have real concerns about that. I think there are some other options. And if you do go ahead with this, I would sincerely hope that you find that whole community garden and that all those orchards and some of the fruit trees and the honeybees, you find us a permanent home. Because moving the gardens simply 50 meters to the west, is moving it onto some very stony ground. I know how stony that ground is because I've dug 20 holes in that ground, and it's not usable. So that's the summary of the delegation. I wrote I wrote all of you, a more detailed response. There are several other members who would like to add to the delegation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Whitcomb. Can we have the next person that'd like to speak to this? Your name and address, please.
Good evening, it's Martina Rowley, and my address is 56 Chisholm Street in Orangeville.
Thank you.
And thanks for the opportunity for us to speak here tonight. I wanted to address the aspects of food security, again, around the placement of a future transit transfer point beside a food garden. In my opinion, if town staff and the council decide to place a new bus transfer station beside an existing, well-established and much-used community food garden, how will you justify that decision, as, in my opinion, it flies in the face of several long-term action plans and charters around food security, those being the current Sustainable Neighbourhood Action Plan, which is being drafted based on suggestions and requests by several hundred citizens who attended recent stakeholder meetings or responded online, and which I was also part of. It is a plan which includes numerous action items on food security and access to food that is affordable, local and healthy, and which, in fact, the town of Orangeville has agreed to support. And secondly, the Headwaters Food Charter, which calls for environmental sustainability, food access and equity, and health and well-being, which includes having a community that is planned for easy access to affordable, local and healthy food, and where food literacy includes food growing, and that is encouraged in that process. I find that if council were to agree to the proposed location of a bus transfer station, it would be a bit of an insult to both these charters and action plans, as well as the locals who are involved with and benefit from the community garden, which are many members of or clients of the food bank as well. In my opinion, it goes against all of the action items for a healthy, livable and socially just town that is aiming to have a long-term and sustainable vision. So I would just ask that you reconsider the location of the bus transfer station. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further commentary? Mr. Lewis.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. Trevor Lewis, 10 Still Court. I'm wearing sort of two hats this evening. I've emailed everyone for the sake of the concerns, but as the president of the Orangeville Food Bank, I do have concerns with regards to some of the fruits and nuts that might be coming and other vegetables from this garden to the food bank. The other hat I was wearing as a former town engineer in Lindsay, where I had responsibility for transit, I'd be concerned about the crossing traffic movements that you'd be creating at that location. Definitely feel there needs to be more consultation before a final decision is made. So that's it. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any further comments from the gallery on this item? Okay, we'll have some comments from councillors. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Your Worship. I won't be supporting this. I just feel there's a better location. I understand staff has said this is the perfect location, but I think staff is going to have to find another. The train station is sitting there unused. Why don't we use it for this? It may put the buses off a bit, but I think in lieu of what's going on, I think we can do that. And also, just to be clear, if council directs county council, like approves this, I will support it at county council, but I don't support it at this level. Thank you.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also won't be supporting the motion as written. I won't go on a long diatribe, but I am a huge proponent of transit. A successful transit system is very important to this town, as is the community garden aspect, not just from a food perspective, but from a social perspective. I believe we have not found an ideal solution for both of these matters, and until we get to a resolution that will satisfy each, I can't see this going up to the next level.
Okay. Any further comments from councillors? Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I too won't be supporting this as written. I echo the comments made both by Deputy Mayor McIntosh and Councillor Peters. I think that our community garden is very, very important, and I think there can be other places to locate that transit.
Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I echo the comments of my fellow councillors and Deputy Mayor as well. My question is it an appropriate time at this point for us to put forward a motion to strike up a new transit committee who can look into, or an action, I guess a task force may be the more appropriate, to look into better locations for this? Is this an appropriate time to do that? Because I think that's a necessary next step. The transit piece is extremely crucial, as we've discussed. So we do need to get this moving forward, but I echo the concerns.
We have a notice of motion ready for next council meeting on that front. There's been some discussion with the CAO and the clerk on the setup of that task force. So if you could, we can have some further conversation during the next 2 weeks, but there's going to be a notice of motion brought at the next council meeting.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Again, for those in the public, to discuss a variety of transit issues, including taxis and things like Uber and transit, Dufferin County Transit. We've got a lot of transit issues that we can talk about and put out on the table. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship.
There you go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to ask a question, and then I'd love to come back and make a statement, if that would be all right. So if I can stay in the queue, can I do that? Sure. To Mr. Whitcomb, who, by the way, I fully recognize has done so much for this town and has made many passionate speeches. So I appreciate your point of view and, you know, and take it to heart when you speak on these issues. I guess for me, maybe I'll ask my question and I'll come back to the background. But you had mentioned about a possibility for a permanent home for the garden. It's lost on me where else it would go. I asked the question of staff, and the answer back was we would look at that. But I'm just curious if you had a recommendation for us, if this was the spot for the transit station. Let's just all pretend that it is. Where does your garden go?
Mary, quite contrary.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, I do not have suggestions for alternates.
Okay.
I do have some suggestions, some of which have been mentioned, for alternates for the transit station, and I will agree. I'm a proponent of public transit, although I...
Mr. Whitcomb, could you come to the podium if you're going to speak, please? Thank you.
I do not have a suggested place for the community gardens to be moved to, and that would require some considerable thought because there are a number of considerations about parking and access and water and so on. I think that also needs to be thought through carefully. I also want to say that I'm a proponent of public transit, although I have to recognize that I walk everywhere. So I can't say I'm any expert on transit. I'm not. And I do very much like the idea that of the butterfly overlapping and interlocking butterfly model. And I realize that a central location makes sense, just not that central location.
Okay, thank you.
So if I may, so ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at somebody who spent 4 years on the Transportation Committee. I've got lots of background, not necessarily with transportation, but with the Transportation Committee as it pertains to Orangeville. And I can tell you that I had the unfortunate pleasure of sitting in a locked room with Mr. Jones for hours at a time, looking at different avenues of places that we could have this thing, and we debated it right, Mr. Jones? We've debated this thing up one side and down the other. And I'm not sitting here as a proponent, and I'm staring at all my friends in the gallery who are food bank volunteers and environmentalists and people I respect in the community. In my view, there isn't another spot to have this. We are on Plan C. There is no Plan D. So it makes it very difficult to recognize as I sit here that there's issues with the plan we put forward, but it's not going to be an ideal plan no matter what we do. And the second point I'd like to make is I also went to the Orangeville Sustainability Neighborhood Action Plan. You know, I was involved in that consultation process. And the action plan, as it speaks to with transportation, it talks about more sustainable and efficient transportation. And as Mr. Whitcomb, again, so articulately said, I mean, it needs a loop. We need a transfer station to be able to have this loop together. I do not sit here today and say to anybody that I'm happy with our transit. We've got a ton of issues that we don't need to go into today, and I think probably resurrecting the Transit Committee in some sort of way to look at these things is probably the right thing to do. But resurrecting the Transit Committee to go through and find out different avenues of where we could have the transfer station, in my view, will be a futile exercise. It's been done. We're at the point. So unfortunately, I don't have a suggestion on where else we can go, but it's a quandary. And what we want our transportation system to do is to tie with these environmental issues. So the first thing I asked when I saw this come up, because council doesn't write these reports, they're written by staff that come to us and then council approves them, but I recognized, I can see that intersection in my mind. Oh my God, there's Sylvia Bradley's trees, and I know she's going to phone me, and she's probably watching from Panama right now.
Hey, Sylvia.
Yeah. You know, you're listened to, you're heard. Where do we go with these trees? It will be a nightmare to pull them out, but they could be pulled out. It's not necessarily what I want to have happen, but they could be pulled out. And then the gardens.
Relocated.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Relocated.
Pulled out sounds nasty.
Hey, I'm a tree hugger, so believe me, I don't want them taken anywhere. But then the gardens as well. You know, to have the fumes on the food that is going to the food bank that we want these people to eat doesn't make any sense either. I guess my point is we're really at a quandary. If we started this system of having a transit committee, I believe that we'll be right back here again. And I wouldn't mind if I could, because it's such an important issue and it's a contentious issue, if I could ask Mr. Jones just to provide some affirmation, perhaps a different perspective than what I'm just given. But I'm a bit frustrated sitting here because I can't provide a solution. I'm not capable of doing so, but I can tell you we're at a critical point. We don't have anywhere to go here. So maybe I'll just turn it over to Mr. Jones.
Let's have Mr. Andrews first, and then I'm going to say something, and then we'll have Mr. Jones. Is that all right? Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, and through your worship, some of your points, Councillor Taylor, I absolutely agree, and I certainly understand the amount of time that you've spent on the Transit Committee and respect the points that you've shared. You know, I think, we're looking at this situation from so many different perspectives. We respect the information we get from town staff to give us guidance and give us an understanding of the situation, but we also take a look at the passionate people who've spoken tonight and the proximity of where the transfer station is located. And my concerns are the health of the food, the longevity of the trees and everything else. And, I also will not be supporting this motion, as has been echoed by some of my other colleagues here at the table. I know that Councillor Taylor has identified the possibility of us coming back to where we are. But I think we would do ourselves due diligence to at least go through that exercise to find out if there's an alternative location. And to Deputy Mayor McIntosh's point, not to say that the train station location would be ideal, but I think it's imperative that we look at ways to find out that, if this is where it ends up, we have to end up finding some solutions to also the other quandary, which is, what do we do with the community garden? And Mr. Whitcomb, you've been very eloquent and passionate about identifying there's, really no other solution, but I still think that we might be able to find something if there is a way of doing so. So this is just my comment, but I thought it was very important to share, and I look forward to Mr. Jones's perspective as well.
Thanks. So I think all of our counselors have had a chance here, except myself, so for those of you that don't know already, I'm a bit of a pragmatist. I like to look at all the facts and dig in deeply on things. Tree relocation is a possibility. I think the trees are young enough that little damage will be done to them. I contacted Transit Manager John Lackey today, had a conversation with him about this, and I wanted to learn more about what the Transit Committee in the past had gone through. And this butterfly analogy that Mr. Whitcomb had mentioned is it's the perfect geographic location for the transit routes to meet at, which would mean that the transit routes are more efficient, that the buses will connect properly because the transit routes will be of equal length, more or less, and which means more efficient use of those buses and more on-time delivery of the service. So for that reason, this is a great location, which has already been vetted through committee and town staff. I've thought about this for 2 or 3 years now. I'm really kind of disappointed that the last council didn't look at electric buses. This would have resolved this issue. Now, I know they're more expensive, but I don't recall this ever being discussed by the previous councils, and I think it's disappointing. We own our own hydro authority, for heaven's sake. I mean, electric vehicle charging and all this stuff, we should be on top of all of these things, and I'd like, town staff and town council going forward to think about this. It seems like electric vehicles are what the future is, and we need to look at it not just in our transit system, but also in our other vehicles. And I feel guilty myself that I don't have a hybrid vehicle or electric vehicle, but I can tell you I'll be making a commitment that that's the next move I'll be making when I purchase another vehicle. So there's 110,000 roughly rides in our public transit system. So by creating a more efficient system, we've talked about technology improvements where riders can see through GPS where the buses are. This is going to help increase our transit ridership. That, again, plays into energy efficiency and our sustainability, neighborhood action plan. So these are all positive things. The other thing that I did today was I asked Mr. Jones about traffic count on Center Street. And let me read you what I received. Our 2015 road needs study identified that the AADT, which stands for Annual Average Daily Traffic Count for Center Street, is 3,430. Some more recent traffic counts lead us to believe that in the vicinity of the Edelbrock Center, the AADD has likely a bit higher, approximately 4,000 vehicles per day. The buses are stopping, again, if there's 3 buses, twice an hour, so you get 6 buses there, 12-hour shift, you've got 72 buses pulling in there. We have 4,000 cars driving by. So my question is, is 72 buses really going to add much more than 4,000 cars going by every day? The other interesting thing about that location is the prevailing wind is traveling from west to east. So, the fumes actually are going to be traveling towards the east at that location. So I think, we need to look at this. We can't, you can't have 100% win every time. So we have to look at what's the best for everybody. And I still think that's the best location. As far as the particulate matter that Mr. Whitcomb referenced, the CO2 and all the other things, 4,000 cars a day go by there, folks. So let's have a little bit of reality here on what the buses are creating in terms of additional pollution on top of that. So anyway, with that being said, we've got Mr. Jones here going to give us a little bit of an update. So would you like to, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and with Council's indulgence at first, I would like to provide Mr. Whitcomb with a bit of an explanation as to why this issue has returned in essentially the same form as it did back in September of 2018. This issue, of course, did come before Orangeville Council during the last term of council, and ultimately this configuration of a transit transfer point at this location was approved by council. Because it will encroach onto the Edelbrock Centre property, we needed to come to an agreement with the County of Dufferin as it relates to allowing us to encroach onto their property with this. The first step for that was to go through their Dufferin Oaks and Community Services Committee, which it did, and they recommended that this be approved. Then the motion went before County Council, and it was either at their last meeting of council or their second last one, I don't recall which, but they tabled the motion, which meant that they didn't address it. It wasn't that they rejected it, it was just set aside. And we checked with the county's clerk, and she indicated that the appropriate thing for Orangeville to do would be to ask to bring that motion back, essentially untable the motion and bring it back before their council. From staff's perspective, we have an approved motion of our council directing us to move in this direction. We've brought it back before this council because this group of councillors hasn't had an opportunity to speak to it. So that's why this came back in essentially the same form as it was back in September. Now, to some of the questions that Councillor Taylor asked, yes, we certainly did spend a considerable amount of time in the Transit Committee speaking about options, different locations, as well as speaking to our consultant who completed the transit optimization study about what would be an ideal location for the transit transfer point. As Councillor Taylor noted, this is Plan C. Plan A was to look at locating it on the Westdale Mall property. That didn't work out. And the second one was looking at a sort of a transit way to cross between Centre Street and Dawson Street through the Edelbrock Centre property, and that also did not succeed. They're all roughly in the same location for the reasons that Council has already articulated. Essentially, it needs to be in a central location in town so that each of the routes is roughly the same distance, so that the buses can do the route and get back at approximately the same time to allow people to transfer. We did look at places like the train station, the Orangeville Mall, which are decent candidates, but again, they're a little further out. In the case of the train station, it's also not something that would coincide with a destination, as it were. The optimization study does identify that, destinations such as commercial areas would be ideal for a transfer point for our transit system, and that's why we have focused on this area. In addition, we recognize that some of the users of our transit system are also clients of the Edelbrock Centre, and again, those synergies make this a good location. So I hope that answers your questions, Councillor Taylor, and I'd be pleased to add anything else if Council would like.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Any further comment from councillors? So we, I think we had a motion on, oh, I'm sorry. I gotta keep looking at this thing. Okay,
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Jones. So through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Jones, I think it's important just in the context you gave, and thank you, you provided the affirmation I was looking for. Could you also speak to the train station? I think people are thinking that might be a solution, and what we had learned through the consultant and our work on the Transit Committee is that wasn't a solution, and I'd just love to make sure we address that before we leave this topic today.
Mr. Jones.
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Taylor, certainly. In staff's work as well as the Transit Committee's work, we did look at a number of possible locations, quite a number of possible locations, and certainly the train station was one of them. It is very much at the extreme south end of town, which is not very centrally located. It would make creating the four-route structure that we aspire to quite difficult. It's also not really a transit location. There's not going to be a lot of people who are going to want to get off there unless they're catching the GO bus. And we just felt that there was much better locations in town for a transfer point where it would be a destination for people to go to, and it was meeting all of the criterias that were noted in the optimization study.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you think about that as a destination. You've got the Edelbrock Center, the beer store, Freshco, the bank. You know, there's a number of destinations at that location, whereas you say the train station, not much there. Councillor Post.
Through you, perhaps to Mr. Jones as well. I know that during the last term of council, they had also discussed the possibility of the fire station being a transfer point or somewhere in that area, knowing that a new fire hall is in the plans for the next 5 years, and I know that hasn't gone through as of yet, but can you speak to perhaps why that's not still on the table as an option?
Mr. Jones.
Through your worship to Councillor Post, the short answer is that we'd really like to have the new transfer point in place long before the next 5 years. In terms of the fire station, it does have some of the same benefits, but we would have to look at the size of the property. Is it going to be a convenient spot to get the buses in, to turn them around and so forth? We didn't look at it in great detail for simple fact that the fire hall wasn't available and it was entirely unclear when it might become available. If indeed this is an issue that drags on for an extended period of time, and certainly it's our hope that it does not, then, and if the fire hall is going to become available, then it's certainly something that we could look at in the future.
Thank you. Okay, so we had a motion on the floor, and that was for this report to be received, and that the transfer terminal matter be sent back to County Council for consideration. Did we have a seconder for that motion? No? Did anybody make the motion? Okay. All right, I'll make the motion. Any seconder? Councillor Taylor. One more chance for comment here. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To be clear, I know I spoke early on and we've had a lot of discussions since then. My objection is not on the location itself. I truly believe it is a good location. It lines up with many of the things Mr. Jones mentioned, but until we have a solution for the proximity of the community garden, and maybe that's just a study to learn the effects on the traffic counts, on the emissions, that sort of thing, until that level of information is presented, I won't be supporting.
I'm just wondering, though, from a timeliness standpoint, having the county council look at this as in parallel as we do some further study, would it not make sense to let this go back to county council for to start the review of you know, leasing land to us or whatever the total package is for the county? Councillor Peters, sorry. I think we can get you here. Hang on. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for making that point, Mr. Mayor. So I guess I'd like further clarification on the result of this motion. It was my understanding that once it got to county, their approval would be all that was needed, because this was essentially our council's approval.
Right. So what would your clarification be specifically then?
I'd like to see, I think a lot of the information and study has been on the location as it relates to transit, but the interaction between the transit hub and the community gardens has not been investigated. We have, some very strong, I'll call them opinions at this point, but they're obviously well-founded in some facts. We just haven't seen them specific to the location. So I have no problem with it going to the county level for investigation and their potential approval, but I don't want to lose the chance to see that information before a final decision's made.
Fair enough. Okay. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So it feels like Councillor Peters and I are on exactly the same page. So I was worried we're going to have a vote, and then there's going to be, I'm going to sit here and be confused about what we're going to do next, because doing nothing is not an option, right? So I absolutely agree, this is the location to do it. However, we don't have the information about the garden and the impact, and candidly, we're not recognizing hard work that's been done and the sensitivities around that. So when this motion fails, which I think it's going to, I'd like to come back, and there needs to be, maybe it's a group effort to come up with the next motion, but it's hey, I think we could, I think I see where you're going, Your Worship, and that is, could we approve the location so that county council could go through, but hinge it upon some sort of report or more information on the food piece? This motion would have been approved by county council. The issue was the person that was in charge of putting it through didn't have followership at county council, whereas now we have two individuals who do have followership at county council. So it is my belief that it will go through. It's just, I think we need to be sensitive to the other issue here, which is the food. So when this fails, I think we need a secondary motion, which I'm not sure how it'll be filed.
Okay. Councillor Post, your suggestion is?
Could we just add a friendly amendment onto that then? That keep it as worded, that the clerk be directed to request that the county clerk bring the transfer terminal matter back to county council for consideration, and that a report be conducted as to the food study portion of it, or something along those lines that will address that issue as well, because I would vote to support that as well if we're addressing that issue at the same time.
Mr. Jones, can you comment on what we're discussing here? Was it something that we have the capability of putting together a report on? Or?
Through your worship, it's something I'd need to consult with staff on. It may require engaging the services of a consultant. The one thing that I can say for certain is if council does approve this configuration of the transfer point, it will mean relocating some of those trees. That much is clear. In terms of the impact on the community garden, staff can look into the possibility of conducting a study and bringing it back for council's consideration. Ultimately, it appears that it's also council's intent that nothing further be done until such time as they've had an opportunity to review a study of that sort and make a final decision on this. Is that correct?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm wondering if there's some sort of static measuring devices that are available that could be put in the vicinity of the garden to measure, you know, I don't know. I mean, there's got to be some sort of, you know, pollution measuring devices that are available. But okay, so let's go to Councillor Sherwood.
Yeah, Mayor Brown, perhaps Mr. Jones can clarify this, but I thought I heard Mr. Jones speak that this location has basically already been approved at this level.
That's right.
And that county council will just be putting a rubber stamp on that. And so in other words, as soon as they give approval, we're good to go and make the transfer station. So I'm wondering, rather than putting a friendly amendment on this motion, we need to develop a whole new motion.
We don't have to do anything.
No.
If county council agrees, we don't have, until we're satisfied that you know, the pollution side of this is resolved.
Perhaps Mr. Jones can clarify. I take it by the words that I heard earlier that if they just approve it, we can go ahead and put that transfer station there. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Mr. Jones.
Through your worship to Councillor Sherwood, you are correct. However, what we aren't asking the county to approve the transfer point. We're basically asking them, or their motion will direct their staff to enter into discussions with town staff about coming up with an encroachment agreement that would allow us to construct part of this on their property. So that's what the county would be approving. If this weren't encroaching onto county property, there would be no need to approach the county whatsoever. Certainly, had council simply passed this motion in the form it's in this evening, and county council had subsequently passed the other motion, staff would have looked to move ahead and get the design done and move ahead with construction. It's fairly clear from what council's discussed tonight, you're not comfortable with that. And if there is indeed this motion that looks at a study into the impact of the buses on the community garden, then certainly I think that the motion should reflect that staff will not proceed with any construction until such time as council has given the final go-ahead after reviewing the results of that sort of study. But that doesn't mean we can't negotiate with the county in the interim to come up with an encroachment agreement in principle that if indeed we do move in this direction, then we can go ahead. Essentially, what it does is it takes the issue away from the county. If they've gone and approved that, we can charge ahead if it is council's wish.
Yeah, I'm Deputy Mayor Mac, in 1 sec, though, I think there's options here, right? There's options, and that is, can we find some way to protect the garden? Again, I don't know if there's a physical barrier or whatever that can happen. Electric vehicles is an option. Relocating the garden is an option. But having the transit hub there is the place, right? So we need to deal with, you know, our ridership on our public transit system and making the best that we can for them. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Worship. So what I'm hearing is you want us to go to county council and get their approval, but we're not ready yet here. Can we not just wait? Like, I just feel silly asking county council's approval when we can't even give our own approval. Why don't we do what we have to do with this, and then go to the county and say, this is what we want, if indeed it ends up being in that location. I just think we need to go in a little bit stronger.
Okay, well, I think that the public transit issue probably supersedes the placement of the garden in that location. And if there's a concern about safety and about food quality, then the garden's got to get moved. That's my thought. I mean, and I know there's been a heck of a lot of work done there, but anyway, those are my thoughts. We have a motion on the table right now yes, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Jones and I have been emailing and suggest that the motion be as written, and a third one would be, and that staff report to council with further information about the impact on the community garden before town council makes a final decision on the location and construction of the transit transfer terminal.
Right.
That staff report to council with further information about the impact on the community garden before town council makes a final decision on the location and construction of the transit transfer terminal.
So my thoughts are we're working in parallel here. Our staff is doing due diligence. I see Mr. Whitcomb up there, right? And that, you know, these things, you know, sometimes government works at glacial speed, so I don't really think that stopping it from going to county council is personally something we should do at this point. I think I would recommend, remember, there's been 4 years of work, maybe, or discussion on this to get to this point, and I just think it's difficult for us to dismiss that altogether, all that work that's been done on transit now. Again, we're moving the food quality issue to the side for when I make that statement, and I don't like to, but I think it needs to be said. Mr. Whitcomb, come on up and have another shot here.
Thank you for the extended opportunity. Far be it from me to tell you what to do, but I'm suggesting what you might do, which is have an addendum to the motion to investigate the relocation of the community gardens. I could rebut your point about the traffic counts and so on, in that the major pollutant is the particulate matter and
Expelled by the bus on an acceleration.
By diesels.
Right.
And so the other vehicles that are non-diesel going down Center Street have less of an impact. It's the particulate matter from the diesels. However,
right.
Is there any possibility, is there any wisdom in having an addendum to the motion which says relocate the food bank garden? I'm going to be treated as a quisling in all of this.
Yeah.
But I think
I think that comment has been already made tonight, that's an option that we will definitely look at.
So I'm saying formalize that.
Yeah.
And the other consideration here is, what's the timing of all of this? If
Yeah.
you said we had to move the food bank garden, Well, when does that start? When does that take place?
Right.
You could build the transfer station theoretically within months.
Yep.
Well, you could, you'd have to start at the same time and spend a good chunk of money to move the community gardens. Just saying.
Okay, fair enough. Is there, Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Whitcomb. This has come back to where I was 45 minutes ago, and that is, an addendum to move the garden, and I asked my good friend Mark Whitcomb about ideas. So I don't actually think it's a consultant that we need. We don't need to spend any money on this. What we need is the use of the knowledge of town staff, and we need the help of concerned citizens that are affiliated with the food bank. Myself, I'd be pleased to do this. And what we need is a list of potential locations in town where that could be. I spend a lot of time personally in KC Gardens putting up those darn Christmas lights every year. In my mind, there's room on the one far side. I'll just throw it out there as a thought. I'm sure other people have different opinions on it, but we need to find a different spot. So that, my idea would be is we allow this motion either to fail, but we go through with what Mr. Whitcomb is suggesting, but not at the expense of the town. We can do this on our own. And Mark, excuse me, we're in formal chain. Mr. Whitcomb, I will grab a shovel with you and be out there digging this darn garden with you. So I'm happy to do that.
It's more than a shovel required. But yeah, that's great, Councillor Taylor, thank you. So do we have an appetite there to add that on there, or that we want to look at other locales for the food? Can we add that on then, please, Madam Clerk? And maybe read that back to us, please, and then we'll vote on this amended motion.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and that staff report to council with further information about the impact on the community garden, including potential relocation of the community garden before the town council makes a final decision on the location and construction of the transit transfer terminal.
That's satisfactory? Okay. All in favor? Okay. All right. Thank you for all the input, everyone. Sorry, unanimous. It was you. Oh, I'm sorry. Who? You were, I'm sorry. My apologies. Deputy Mayor McIntosh was opposed. Yes. Okay. Oh, moving on to committees, board minutes, et cetera. We have Police Services Board minutes of November 13th, 2018. We have a motion to accept those minutes. Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? We have a Committee of Adjustment meeting from January the 9th, 2019. Recommendation that we receive the minutes of that meeting as listed. Councillor Sherwood, seconded by Councillor Post. All in favor? Thank you. Correspondence. We have, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. That was a Freudian slip there. Okay, question period. Is there anybody that would like to talk? Mr. Whitcomb and Mr. Lehman. Let's have Mr. Whitcomb first and then Mr. Lehman second. Please.
This is not to deal with the issue that I've just been about. I'm puzzled by how I would go about, as a citizen, how I would go about putting in appearing as a delegation when the requirement is, correct me if I'm wrong, something like a week ahead of time, I have to put in a delegation, and yet I only see the agendas for the meeting on, what is it, Thursday or Friday before the meeting. So there's no way that I can respond as a delegation.
Correct. You're allowed to speak in question period to any item on the agenda.
Yes, but
Right.
in this, tonight, I would have been speaking after you made the decision. And I really thank you, deeply thank you, for giving us the opportunity to speak as a delegation at the time that motion came up. And if that is to become a standard practice, then I'm fine. But otherwise, given that I'm supposed to have a week, and I only have the delegation a week ahead of time, and I only have the agenda 3 or 4 days ahead of time.
Right. Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mayor Brown, our procedural bylaw requires you to submit a request in writing 7 days before a council or committee meeting for an item that is not on the agenda that you wish to initiate. Persons wishing to speak to an item on the agenda can notify the clerk by 10 a.m. on the date of the meeting. So that would have been 10 o'clock this morning for any item on tonight's meeting. And as you know, you came in this evening and told me, and I advised the mayor, who recognized you at that point in the meeting.
Right. Mr. Lehman?
Learning all new things here. Under the heading of concerned citizens, for your information, I'm a retired electrician. I've worked for over 50 years in just about everything. I've done a lot of design work. I've worked on some of the largest projects in North America and the Arctic. Also, the lights that light our flag when you drive into town. You're looking at the guy that lit all the lights and made all the underground work done there for Orangeville. My name is even on the little board over there. So
Thank you for doing that for us.
what I'm going to say is, as Councillor Taylor mentioned, we have concerned citizen. I don't know if there's an actual list, but because of the experience I have had, even the new hospital we have in Brampton, when I worked down there, is my last project before retirement, they made a huge mistake in how they ground things like people who sit in operating tables or operating rooms. And I looked at the grounding when I went onto that job, and I said, this is all wrong. I said, how do you know? Well, I said, because I worked on hundreds of jobs and I know what I know. I said, it's got to be done this way. So I started doing it. The boss man company said, who's doing all this work? I said, I am. Come with me. I had to go up and change all the wiring and all the grounding and all the operating rooms. I've worked on jobs. Manitoba Hydro offered me a lifetime job, which I had to decline because my ex-wife wouldn't go to Manitoba. That job still stands.
Do you have a question, Mr. Lehman?
The question is, would you want to put my name on a list as a concerned citizen? If you're going to be looking at things like electric buses, I have a lot of experience electrically, so I can give you practical knowledge that you may not get from consultants, that you'd be paying big dollars. I'll work for nothing.
Okay.
So I've done
Appreciate that offer, Mr. Lehman, and perhaps when our transit committee gets struck at some point, you'll be coming
Give me a call. I'd be glad to sit
be
down.
involved.
I'll sit and listen, and if I'm allowed to speak, I will tell people where they're right and where they're wrong.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
very much.
Appreciate that. Are there any other, yes, ma'am?
Your Worship and Council, thank you. I have 3 questions tonight. That's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, your name again?
Oh, sorry. My name is Karen Morrison.
Karen, of course.
Yeah.
Sorry, Karen.
No
I remember.
worries. I should have done that,
Yeah,
Your Worship.
sorry.
I live on
Starview.
Starview community. And I will be adjacent to the Orangeville Highlands Phase 2 development. My question is...
You mean that beautiful conservation land that's going to be preserved at that part?
Sorry?
I'm kidding. No, go ahead. Go ahead, Karen.
My question is on analysis of impact study on neighboring private wells. I know there's a number of impact studies that are taking place. Some have taken place. But my question is, will the private wells for the neighboring residents that'll be adjacent to this, will they be part of an overall study so that we as residents have a baseline?
I doubt it. You're not in our municipality, so I doubt it. But Mr. Jones, if you could comment?
Certainly, Your Worship. As part of the supporting documentation for this development, the developer is required to undertake a hydrogeologic study. The Conservation Authority typically requires developments to match pre-development infiltration rates so that there wouldn't be any less water getting in the ground than there is now. Certainly, the proximity to private wells is something that would be considered, and those hydrogeologic studies are reviewed on behalf of the town of Orangeville by Credit Valley Conservation. Prior to the development moving forward, the conservation would need to approve the hydrogeologic study. Based on my understanding of tonight's motion, you know, the town is willing to sit down and meet with concerned citizens as well as the developer and perhaps discuss some of these issues so you can understand what was in the reports and the extent to which these things were considered in the development proposal.
Thank you. Next item,
you.
Karen?
My other question is, we recently became aware of changes to the Orangeville Mall. And we have no idea if this development is tied into these reconfiguration of the Orangeville Mall and big box stores coming in. But my question would have to, is around the traffic studies and tying that into this reconfiguration of the Orangeville Mall. So when big box stores come in, there will likely be a lot more visitors to the mall. Residents, but also visitors to Orangeville. And are the impact studies taken into account the reconfiguration of the Orangeville Mall and the big box stores?
I'm not sure on a fully developed commercial property like that a traffic study is needed. I mean, they built the building already. It's a commercially viable building. Mr. Jones?
Through you, Your Worship, with respect to the Orangeville Highlands development, its traffic impact study would only be considering the impact of that development on the adjacent roadways. In terms of the Orangeville Mall, there has been a pre-consultation with staff. However, there is no application before us. If they were looking at changing use or expanding use, they may very well have to do a traffic impact study to look at what the incremental impact of increasing vehicular traffic would be on the surrounding roads. But because we don't have an application in front of us, that's not something that we can consider at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Okay. As citizens, we are wondering if we also receive responses of any of the findings of the impact studies. Is that something that...
There'll be further public consultations, and this information will be available to you when it's complete.
Okay.
Mr. Jones, am I correct in that?
Yes, Your Worship, essentially you're correct. My understanding, again, of the motion coming out of this evening's meeting is that staff will be consulting with the developer and the concerned citizens in an effort to let them know what work has been done and whether they have any outstanding concerns.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other folks from the audience that would like to speak? Mr. Davidson.
Good evening, Darren Davidson, Orangeville, Ontario. First, I'd like to indicate I'm here on behalf of the Hanson High Density Awareness Group as a member. First, I'd like to thank Council for putting forward the motion of last Council meeting that asked staff to come back with their recommendations in regards to our concerns, and we've received that report, and we thank you very much for that. In respect of that report, the recommendation number 4, could we, as part of the group, how will we receive notice, and is there any timeline in terms of how the public consultation will occur with our concerns?
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, now that we have an approved motion of council, that's something that staff will be discussing with the developer, and essentially we'll get back to you.
And we have...
Typically, everybody within a certain radius has circulated the information, right, as the process goes on, and the residents will be informed. And there'll be other public consultations. This is a process that's going to be going on for some time.
I appreciate that. I guess what I'm suggesting is if we can get direct notice, that'd be appreciated. I believe, Madam Clerk, there was a list that we signed our names to. That would cover that off.
Madam Clerk.
To you, Mayor Brown, yes, certainly anybody who's signed that list and given us their email address, we can notify them by email. We have tried to reach people by phone as well, but that does become problematic.
Great, thank you very much. My final question for the evening, please. In anticipation of the upcoming LPAT pre-hearing, February 26th, can we expect council to direct staff to issue the town's contribution to the LPAT issues list prior to that meeting? If we understand the intention or the purpose of the February 26th LPAT meeting, it is there's an expectation that all parties will put forth their items that will be tabled onto an issues list. And we're simply asking if there's an opportunity to be privy to that list once it's completed, that we receive that prior to the February meeting at LPAT.
Mr. Ward?
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, I'm not certain if that's procedurally feasible, quite frankly, because the LPAT proceedings direct that issues lists are to be generated and provided by the parties to the hearing. That being said, however, as noted in the motion related to the staff report, there certainly is a direction for staff to consult or have further discussion with parties and participants to the matter. And perhaps as part of that discussion, there can be some dialogue as to what the issues are. We certainly have documented the issues put forward by members of the public, as well as Mr. Davidson's group with respect to concerns about the application. No doubt those will form some of the issues going forward, being put forward by the town, because a lot of those issues relate to questions about the applications that we as staff share as well with respect to the applications.
Right. Thank you.
Great, and I'll end with this to Mr. Whitcomb, if you don't mind, through council. If you need land space, perhaps the garden could go somewhere close to the Hanson lands at one point. Thank you.
Something went through my mind earlier tonight, Darren. There's quite a bit of parkland there, and that may be an opportunity. So we'll. Okay. Any other questions from the gallery? Okay. That being said, we're going to move on. We have some correspondence that has been received. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I just wanted to ask a question with regards to this correspondence from the Headwaters Community in Action. I don't know if there is someone here from that organization. No. Well, I'll ask my question. One of the things that I noted in the document here was that there's supposed to be a municipal council representative that has a vote on that committee. Perhaps, Madam Clerk, you can clarify, is that member one of us on that committee?
Or is it county council?
Or it doesn't specify in the document. It just says a municipal county representative who gets one vote. So that's what I was going to ask the parties if they were here. Is that which council? But anyhow, there's no one here to answer that question. And do you know offhand if any Orangeville Council member has been on that?
No, I'm not aware. Sorry, I don't see it in the document. Can you show me where it is? Which paragraph is it? Which page? No, I can't.
It's in the second paragraph where it starts with HFFA. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not.
Sorry, no, I have no idea. As far as I'm aware, there was no member of Orangeville Council on that committee.
Yeah, you can see where it says municipal council
I
representative.
do see that. To my knowledge, it certainly hasn't been included as part of our boards and committees bylaw.
Okay. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a note to council before we get the motion on the table. There is an ask at the end of that letter with respect to funding of the food brochure, or the food map, as it were. Just sort of as a recap for anyone not following the issue, HFFA did apply through the community grants program through the budget process that was not received, and in particular, that was one of my objections to the way that particular piece was handled. So I'd like to propose that the motion be amended to include the $500 that's being asked. Right now, the town of Caledon is providing $2,000, and I think from a tourism perspective, it would benefit the entire town.
And from what budgetary source would you suggest that come from? Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had not, I didn't have a specific proposal for the modest amount. It could perhaps come out of the Sustainability Committee Reserve. It could perhaps come out of any other reserve or operating budget as council saw fit. But I think this is an opportunity to support a good local initiative.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
I would have no issue supporting that. I just feel, though, that this is like a grant sort of thing that should have come in on time, and knowing what a stickler you are for being on time. But just my comments, thank you.
Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, my comment would be if they did apply through the community grant and we did not approve that. So I would say that we're backtracking here, and I would not support it. However, perhaps they could be encouraged to go to the OSAT committee and ask for some funds out of some of their budgetary money, but to have it come through our community grants, I think we will be in a very hardcore position here for having people come at different times throughout the year. We've gone through that grant process, we've approved who we want to approve, and I think to bring them back at different times throughout the year, we have to be very cautious about that.
Okay. Councillor Peters.
I'll be quick. I agree in principle, 100%. I think initiatives that are funded based on a request to council should benefit the entire community and fit within the overall plan. I believe this does, and my rationale again was that they had gone through that grant process, were subsequently denied. I saw this as an opportunity to make that right to some degree. So whether it happens now or through the Sustainability Committee at some point, I support the initiative and would hope that that motion would pass.
Madam Clerk, one quick question on our committees that we're going to be talking about next council meeting. The funding of those committees, has that been set already?
I'm looking at Mr. Brennan. I think it was set through the budget. Certain committees received certain amounts, and the committees that weren't named have no budget.
Just to maybe a workaround here, is there an opportunity to reach into one of those committee budgets for this $500? So you've got a friendly amendment here. So I guess we need to have a seconder for this friendly amendment. Is there anybody wanting to second this? Mr. Taylor. Sorry, Madam Clerk? Yeah.
Through you, there is no friendly amendment. Councillor Peters moved a motion to receive the correspondence and approve a one-time grant of $500 to the Headwaters Food Alliance. And I would suggest it be left at that, and we can ask the treasurer to identify a funding source.
Okay, fair enough. So fair enough. Councillor Taylor has seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Andrews and Sherwood have opposed. Okay, that's passed. We've got some information items now. Source Water Protection Annual Report. Recommendation that the information items listed be received. Councillor Taylor, or Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I certainly support the motion and will make it, but while it's on the floor, I know not many people will read through this report necessarily. It's at the end of a lengthy agenda, and
wait till I get home.
It's not as exciting a topic it is for some as it is for me, but I was hoping while we had perhaps the attention of the gallery and those online, if Mr. Jones could briefly expand on A, the salt reduction plan that was put into place for 2018, and B, the drinking water conservation efforts that are proposed for 2019.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Through your worship to Councillor Peters, the salt management plan is actually going to be coming back before council for its review on February 25th. So you'll get to see all of it at that point in time. However, without letting everything out of the bag before the report comes to council, it does make a number of suggestions, including committing to training all winter maintenance staff in salt best management practices, ensuring that all third-party winter maintenance contractors hired by the town hold credible training in salt best management practices, and committing to exploring feasibility of adopting new application technologies and looking at viable low chloride alternatives to salt removal. With respect to your second comment regarding water conservation, it is something that the town has been working on for many years, and it has been a recommendation coming out of a number of studies, including our long-term servicing strategy. Perhaps the most significant water conservation exercise that this town is engaged in is universal water metering. The significance in the drop of per capita water usage after we began billing for water usage is really quite remarkable. And we've seen that decline continue. We also have a toilet rebate program whereby if people replace an existing toilet with a toilet that uses less water, the town will give them a rebate for a portion of those costs. We also sell rain barrels at cost to residents who want to capture rainwater for watering their gardens later on instead of using town water. Certainly, we're going to continue to look at other options for water conservation, and that's information that will be brought back before council at an appropriate time.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so Councillor Peters made a motion to accept this report. Seconder, Deputy Mayor McIntosh, all in favor? Unanimous. Okay, we've got item 15, which is a notice of motion given prior to the meeting. Proposed speed limit reductions on Alder and Spencer. Let's start with Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. I'd like to just thank Councillor Taylor for bringing this forward in previous council meeting. I feel that, for those of us who are in the gallery and online, those of us who've been elected, we've had an opportunity to have many people reach out. We continuously get input from many different people about the safety of our streets. And I know most recently Councillor Post and Councillor Taylor and I have had specific residents who also have had concerns about specific locations, be that in certain neighborhoods. And I think that, this is a particular matter where we're looking at the safety of not only the residents, but in particular the locations near some of the schools. One that has come up most recently is on College Avenue, near Blind Line. You have two schools, St. Andrews and, of course, Credit Meadows. Even in my direct neighborhood, you have, of course, PEPs and other locations that many other people would be aware of. I know in speaking with Mr. Jones, there is an opportunity for an update, or at least some information that I feel is going to be at some point circulated, and you may be speaking to that at some point. But I also feel concerned about that we also, as members of council, will at times end up getting people from our community who are passionate about the safety of their neighborhood. And, my thoughts are we have to have some kind of process. I know there is some kind of process that exists under the Highway Traffic Act and in other ways of implementing this within the town's borders. But if there is a process, let's follow it. And again, that's why I'm commending Councillor Taylor for the process that you've gone through, because I think it ends up hopefully solving some serious concerns that are in that area. And I take a look at the change of the Spencer Avenue interchange there at Riddell. I'm in that area regularly, and I still just cannot believe the amount of traffic that's now going back and forth. So I think that this is going to help the concerned citizens, but we also have other concerned citizens in other parts of our community. So I think some clarity, some guidance from town staff will be very important in moving forward with any decisions we have. And I guess, what I was really wanting to echo is just not only my thanks to Councillor Taylor for moving this forward, but it also provides us with some assurances that we may end up looking at other things at some future date that hopefully we can end up implementing, but in a very positive but proper fashion.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. This is my motion, and candidly, I think anybody who's watching it on TV tonight or in the gallery should know I live on the street. So here we are with my first motion about traffic, and it's all about me. I do want to let everyone know, I didn't just knock on the doors of Spencer Avenue. I knocked on many, many doors throughout our town. I listened. There's a long list that I've kept. I've kept your names. I know what the issues are, and I promise to get through them. Why I've started here, it's something that I'm intimately familiar with, and I'll get this one hopefully done in some sort of way, and then we'll move on to others. So I do want to make that point. The second point would be is this journey for me actually started while I was writing for The Citizen, and I had phoned my good friend, Mr. Jones, and asked for advice on how I could make change in the community. And I started along the lines, I want to share the story because it's important to let everybody know that we have gone through a process here. And the initial thinking was let's get some stop signs in. And the reality is the intersections that intersect with Spencer, they do not have enough traffic on them to justify stop signs, although that is what I want. And if you speak to the residents, that is what they want. It just doesn't make sense. And Mr. Jones, I listened. And then when you talk about speed bumps, which I thought, well, that would be a glorious solution to this as well, it also doesn't make sense. And Mr. Jones, I listened. So the idea would be is the snow plows have to come down. There's an expense to move them in and out because they wouldn't stay in certain seasons. Based on the snow that we get, it just doesn't make sense. The reality is this speed zone change is a nice compromise. It perhaps won't satisfy all. I think it will make the issue better. While I've been in council here tonight, my phone buzzed and I got a picture of an 18-wheeler going up and down Spencer Avenue. So the problem is real, and we need to adjust it. And then I also want to speak to Alder. And why Alder is part of this motion is, again, I don't live on that street. However, what this motion will do is, and I did include it on social media, a gentleman named Harry Bell, who lives on Alder, said to me at the time, if you adjust Spencer, you're just making the problem go one street over. So that means from the bypass to Beeline, you're going to create a different highway situation. So they really are tied hand in hand. They both need to be done at the same time. Otherwise it's just not a good thing for the community. And I guess the last piece would be is, as I said, we're going to move on to these other locations. And all due respect to Mr. Jones, he did give me his advice. We are not in an agreement, but I still really enjoy your advice.
Thank you. Any further comment from councillors on this motion? Pardon me? The motion has been made by Councillor Taylor, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All in favor? Opposed? Oh, unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to 15.2, Community Grant Program. Again, I believe, Councillor Taylor, did you put this one forward as well? Would you like to speak to this?
I would, Your Worship, thank you. So this one came out of the same thing, and my friend Councillor Peters spoke to it earlier as well. And that is when we went through the community grants piece, I was uncomfortable. So something that again is near and dear to me, which is the Optimist Club and Christmas in the Park, there was a spot in this where they didn't qualify. What I think would be best for all is if we had a criterion set up that we could all see, that the service clubs could see, and it would be very transparent and easy to understand what that is. Because when I gave the feedback back to some of the organizations, they couldn't understand why potentially it was an issue. And as a fairly even-keeled person, I felt myself getting emotional during that discussion. And I think if we had a process in place, it would just slide by and it'd be very clear, hey, you're not getting the funding for that organization because of spot 3 and spot 6. So what I'd like to do is have staff come back to us with what that criterion could be.
Right, and also I'm just wondering if those of us who are involved with these community grant applications, because sometimes community organizations look for a champion on council to help. We need to review their application for them, because, you know, as Councillor Sherwood pointed out during our budget deliberations, some of the applications were dated 2017. They weren't, you know, filled out properly, and yet we let things slide. So we're bringing this forward to make sure that the criteria is followed going forward, and it's very clear to everybody that is applying to the town council for funds. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I just want to be clear on this, that is the current community grants program provincially mandated, the criterias, or is this specific to the municipality's criteria? You have to be mindful that we fall under the Municipal Act, and if, you know, and so we have to be very mindful of the criterias within the Municipal Act. So that's why I'm asking if staff just can clarify, is this a provincially mandated?
Madam Clerk.
We can check with the Treasury. I do not believe it's provincially mandated. This is municipal town funds.
Okay.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And again, just to echo some of the other comments that have been made by members of council, I do recall at the previous meeting that, again, I also ended up saying that this process, again, not to be critical, but I think we needed to go through a refresher. And I think that this particular motion that has been put forth is certainly addressing that particular matter. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so you've made a motion. Oh, you're going to second it? Okay, Councillor Taylor has made the motion. Councillor Peters is second. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Sherwood is opposed. Okay. So we have some unfinished business. Sorry? Oh, is there a notice of motion? Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. All right, Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Having just come through the campaign process, I'm sure I can speak, and Councillor Andrews said it beautifully, that through this campaign process, there has been significant concerns brought up by residents. The first one is taxes, and second is the residential safety of the communities. And very recently, there has been dozens of emails come through to myself and to Councillor Taylor as well about College Avenue specifically. I did speak with Mr. Jones as well, and today I'm prepared to put forth a notice of motion, which I've already sent to the clerk and has a copy of it. And what it says is, whereas the protection of the safety of our citizens on residential streets is a paramount concern for our residents, and whereas there have been numerous vocal concerns from residents about the traffic safety on College Avenue, and whereas there are 3 schools in the neighborhood with walking students, St. Andrews, Credit Meadows, and St. Benedict, and whereas the curve in the road on College creates a blind spot that when combined with speed makes the area a dangerous place for pedestrians, therefore, we would like to make the following motion, that a 4-way stop be implemented immediately at the intersection of College and Fieldgate as a measure to enforce traffic calming in the neighborhood.
Thank you. Okay. So we're receiving that notice of motion. Thank you. Okay, moving on, we've got some unfinished business, including 17.1, which is the 2019 tax levy operating budget adoption. The recommendation that the 2019 net tax levy operating budget, excluding net transfers to and from reserves and transfers to capital budget, of $30,114,431 be approved. May I have a motion? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Sherwood. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Peters opposed. We have 17.2, 2019 capital budget adoption recommendation. 2019 capital budget totaling $9,962,900 is presented be approved. We have a motion for this. Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Sherwood. Any further discussion? All in favor? All right, unanimously passed. I don't believe we have any new business, or is there anybody else? No? So, moving on to the confirmation bylaw. bylaw to confirm the proceedings of this council. Councillor Peters, motion, seconded by Councillor Post. All in favor? And notice, could we have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Taylor, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All in favor? Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.